God's chosen ones, 3 hidden symbols on your hands that reveal your divine mission. You thought it was just a line, just a moon near your nail, just an M on your palm. But what if it was never random? What if the marks on your hands were messages? Prophetic blueprints, etched not by accident, but by heaven itself, reminding you who you really are. Long breath, soft music rises. If you carry a crescent moon, or an M that formed before you understood its meaning, or both, you weren't just born, you were assigned. And if you've been feeling the pull, the pressure, the spiritual ache inside, it's because the marks are calling. And heaven is waiting for your yes. Final line. If you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it, the hands of the hidden ones. There are certain signs the world overlooks, but heaven never does. You've probably stared at your hands before, tracing the lines absent-mindedly, wondering why they formed the way they did. You've noticed the little white half-moons at the base of your nails. Maybe you've seen that strange M on your palm, not once, but on both hands. And something inside you whispered, "This means something, doesn't it?" You didn't ask for these signs, but they've been with you since the beginning. While others were chasing trends, you were chasing truth. While your friends were blending in, you were trying to figure out why you didn't. Not because you were rebellious, but because you were restless, as if something deep inside you remembered another world, a quieter world, a higher world, a world where marks on flesh meant a mission from God. And if you're honest, you've always felt different, not in an arrogant way, but in an ancient way, like a soul that's walked here before, like you were born with something to say, something to carry, but life didn't make it easy. You were misunderstood early, the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one with too much emotion or too much strength. They didn't know what to do with you, so they labeled you, but heaven never did. Heaven called you marked, not for shame, marked for service, marked for spiritual assignment. Because before you ever had a platform, before you ever learned the language of your gift, before you could explain the fire in your chest that never quite went out, God wrote your name in his book and carved a signature into your skin. Yes, chosen one. It's been there the whole time. The crescent moon on your nail, the M across your palm, the double M mirrored on both hands, or maybe the rare fusion of moonlight and mountain, a crescent and 2M. These weren't quirks. These were codes, prophetic inscriptions you've carried quietly, waiting for the right moment. And now that moment has come. Because when God marks someone, he also wakes them. And if you're watching this now, he's waking you. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt things before they happened? Known truth in your gut when no one else saw it? Felt split between a deep spiritual world and a demanding practical life? Then maybe the marks are your mirror. And this story is your confirmation. You are not lost. You are not late. You are marked. And you are being called, always been drawn to the sky. Not the bright, boastful midday sun, but the quiet moon, the shifting clouds, the colors that spoke without saying a word. Ava sat on the back porch of her little white house, wrapped in a worn blanket, fingers tracing the pale crescents near her thumbs. Most people called them lanulas. Doctors explained them away as signs of health or circulation. But Ava always felt they were something more. Marks of memory, messages from somewhere else. She hadn't known what they meant as a child, but she remembered the first time they glowed. It was a summer night, much like this one. She was 8. Alone in the backyard, lying barefoot on the warm grass, the wind catching her hair like a hymn, The fireflies were blinking like Morse code from heaven. And somewhere inside her chest, a pressure built, not painful, but profound. Feeling she couldn't name, a knowing that wasn't taught. She had looked up at the moon and whispered, "I feel you. I don't know why, but I feel you." And just like that, the wind shifted. The trees leaned in, and she knew, not with her mind, but with her soul, that she wasn't just speaking to the sky. Ava never quite fit into her childhood world. She didn't know how to explain the tears that came during certain songs, or why she couldn't enter some rooms without feeling something off. Her mother called it being too sensitive. Her classmates called it weird. But Ava knew something was different. Not wrong, just different. She remembered things before they happened. She would write dreams in spiral notebooks. Dreams about people who later called her crying, saying, "I don't know why, but I thought of you." She could feel when someone was smiling but secretly breaking inside. And when the energy in a room shifted, she knew, long before words were spoken, who was lying and who wasn't. But being this sensitive wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous. It meant crying in bathrooms during family reunions because of the unspoken tension no one else noticed. It meant retreating into nature, journals, and silence, because that was the only place the noise stopped. It meant carrying burdens that weren't even hers, and feeling like a sponge for other people's pain. There were seasons she wished she could turn it off. She tried. She went numb. She dulled herself down to survive. Friendships, churches, workplaces. She stopped talking about her hunches. She stopped telling people about her dreams. She tried to blend in, to be normal. But it never lasted, because the gift wasn't going away. And then one day, it all made sense. It was the morning after her father's funeral. The house was full, but Ava was alone. Alone in the kitchen, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug, when her aunt came in, the one who rarely spoke. She didn't say hello, didn't even make eye contact. She just stared at Ava's hands and said quietly, "You feel everything, don't you?" Ava didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her aunt reached forward and turned her palm upward. "The crescent moons," she whispered. "Our family carries them. Some say they're just nails, but I think they're markers. God puts them on the ones he sends here to sense what others ignore." A pause. Then the final line, spoken with a sacred weight. "You weren't made to fit in, Ava, you were made to feel." And just like that, something unlocked. Not in the room, but in her. From that day on, she stopped running from the Crescent. She began studying the rhythm of her emotions. She realized she wasn't too emotional, she was in tune. She noticed the moon cycles matched her spiritual tides. She leaned into stillness, embraced solitude, and found her sanctuary in silence. She realized that prayer wasn't always spoken. Sometimes it was just presence. She discovered her energy changed rooms. People opened up to her without knowing why. Strangers cried in her presence. Children clung to her. Animals never flinched around her. She wasn't just Ava anymore. She was an atmosphere shifter. And the Crescent, the one etched quietly at the base of her thumbs, was a divine finger. Still, the gift had its cost. There were days when Ava didn't know which emotions were hers and which were someone else's. Crowds made her dizzy, small talk drained her, and love, love was hard. Because when you feel everything, it's hard to find someone who doesn't mistake your depth for damage. But she kept walking, kept sensing, kept believing that this sensitivity wasn't her flaw, it was her assignment. because something inside her knew. There's a reason she was born with this compass in her soul. One night, she dreamt of a room filled with candles. Each flame represented a person. Some flickered, some burned low. But one candle, her candle, burned steady, quiet, but bright, real, and she heard a whisper. You are the one who sees before others do. You are the one who lights the way quietly. You are the one who heals through listening, not shouting. You are the one marked by the moon, because you walk between the worlds. When she woke, she wept, not out of sadness, but recognition. She had always suspected there was more to her. Now she remembered. Now Ava looks at her hands differently. She knows the world still misunderstands her. She knows there will always be noise, critics, distractions. But she also knows this: the gift is not going away because it came from God. And when God gives a gift, He gives it on purpose. So if you've ever wondered why you feel too much, why you dream so vividly, why you know things before they're said, why your presence calms chaos, if you've ever felt like your soul was made of water, soft, deep and sacred, then maybe you carry it too. The crescent moon, the quiet calling, the sacred sorrow that makes you sensitive, the mark that says, you were born to feel what others ignore. You are not broken, you are finely tuned. Your empathy isn't a flaw, it's divine technology. You were not created for noise, you were created for depth. You're not fragile, you're chosen. And that crescent, it's heaven's reminder. You were made to light the way, even when the world is dark. Part 2. The M on the hand, the leader they couldn't ignore. Elijah never asked to lead. He didn't wear sharp suits, didn't shout in meetings, didn't dominate conversations. But somehow, when everything fell apart, people always looked to him. And it wasn't just work, it had always been that way. In college, when a group assignment spiraled, they turned to him. At church, when a conflict broke out, the pastor asked him to mediate. Even as a child, when the neighborhood kids argued, they gathered on Elijah's porch and waited for his decision. He used to think it was coincidence. But now, he was starting to realize something deeper, especially after what happened that Tuesday. The staff meeting had started like any other, long, loud, and lost. Budgets were tight, tensions were high, their director was out, and no one knew what to do about the upcoming city contract deadline. Fingers pointed, voices rose, blame flew across the room like paper darts. And then Elijah quietly lifted his hand, not in anger, not in pride, just a soft signal that he had something to say. The room fell quiet. He laid his hand flat on the table, palm facing up, and for a moment they all noticed it. That natural M that stretched across the middle of his hand, like a mountain trail. Most people had lines, but his? It was clear, prominent, unmistakable. He didn't explain it, he didn't need to. Instead, he calmly outlined a plan. What to delegate, what to table, who to call, where to breathe. He didn't raise his voice, but the room shifted. Not because he demanded authority, but because his presence carried it. Elijah didn't grow up thinking he was a leader. He grew up the oldest of 5, raised by a single mum who worked 3 jobs. He learned early how to take care of others before they fell apart. By 12, he was helping with homework. By 15, managing the budget. By 17, working night shifts just to keep the lights on. Leadership wasn't a title, it was a survival instinct. But even back then, teachers would say, Elijah, there's something about the way you carry yourself. He didn't understand it then. He just knew that he couldn't walk away from what needed fixing. The leadership, the real kind, carries weight. And over time, Elijah began to feel the pressure of being the strong one. People expected him to know what to do, always. To be calm when they panicked. To be wise when they were reckless. To keep showing up even when his soul was unraveling. There were days he went home and sat in the dark, hands shaking, heart heavy. But still the next morning he showed up. He wasn't leading for applause. He was leading because something inside him couldn't stay silent when things were falling apart. He remembered one night especially, after a long day of putting out fires at work, he stopped by his mother's house. She poured him tea and sat across from him, watching him closely. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her eyes landed on the M. She traced it, gently. "Your grandfather had this too," she said softly. "We always said it stood for Messiah's mission. Those who carry it don't run from hard places. They walk into them, even when no one says thank you." Elijah looked down at his hand like he was seeing it for the first time. And something broke in him, not weakness, but recognition. He wasn't cursed with responsibility. He was commissioned for leadership. From that day forward, he stopped apologizing for the way he was wired. He didn't need a title to lead. He didn't need a spotlight to impact. He realized that leadership wasn't about being loud. It was about listening for heaven's cues. It was the moment he noticed tension in a room and shifted the atmosphere. It was when he called out injustice, even if it made others uncomfortable. It was when he told the truth, gently but firmly, and watched it break chains. But the M was more than leadership. It was a compass. It helped him see when people were pretending, when words said one thing, but eyes said another. He knew when someone wasn't telling the whole truth, when a deal felt wrong, when a friend's smile masked grief. He once told a colleague, "I don't have proof, but I have peace, and that my green light." And every time he followed that inner knowing, life confirmed it later. Still, the gift wasn't without battles. There were seasons when Elijah doubted himself, when the weight of others' expectations crushed him, when being the responsible one made him invisible. He wanted someone to see him, not just what he carried. He wanted someone to ask, "Are you okay?" Not because he seemed weak, but because even warriors bleed too. That night, after the meeting, the one where he led without trying, the intern lingered. She was new, young, shy. She walked up to him, eyes wide with something between reverence and relief. "Sir," she whispered, "how do you do that? The way you handle people, the calm, the clarity. I want to learn that." He smiled, tired but kind. He lifted his hand again, palm up. Let her see the M. "It's not about learning to lead," he said. "It's about listening to what's already in you. Leadership isn't volume, it's vision." She nodded, then looked down at her own hand. And for a moment, he saw it. A faint but forming. He smiled. "You've got it too. It'll grow stronger when you stop running from it." Elijah walked home that night feeling the familiar ache in his shoulders, but also something deeper. Peace. Because he finally understood the truth. He wasn't leading out of obligation. He was leading out of ordination. The mark on his hand wasn't an accident. It was a signature, a sign that heaven trusted him with influence and integrity. And even if the world never clapped, he would keep showing up. Because that's what real leaders do. You don't have to force leadership when God already formed it in you. You don't have to beg for favor when your hand already carries the mark. Your M isn't just a letter, it's a mission. You were not made to follow the crowd. You were made to carry the compass. You don't need a stage to lead. You just need courage to keep showing up. And if you've ever felt like people look to you, even when you don't know why, is if you've ever held things together for everyone else. If you've ever walked into chaos and suddenly felt calm, then maybe you carry it too. The mantle, the mark that says, you are the leader they couldn't ignore. Part 3. The double M, where wisdom marries intuition. Naomi had always lived in tension, not emotional chaos, but a deeper tension, a sacred pull between what she felt and what she knew, between instinct and intellect, between divine whispers and daily deadlines. And for most of her life, she thought that was her weakness. But one morning, after a night of soul wrestling and sleepless prayers, she looked down at her palms in the dim light of dawn and saw it. 2 M's, as one etched across each hand, as if heaven had reached into her skin and said, I trust you to carry both. She'd never noticed them before, not really, but now they were clear. Strong, firm, mirrored. She ran her fingers over them slowly, as if tracing sacred roads carved by God himself. And in that moment, Naomi understood something her whole life had been trying to teach her. She wasn't torn. She was balanced. She wasn't too much. She was She wasn't confused. She was called to carry dual realms and bring them into harmony. Naomi had always been the one who sensed things no one said and fixed things no one saw. She could walk into a room and feel the tension before the meeting started. She could predict outcomes, navigate emotions, build strategy, and comfort crying friends, all before lunch. Her boss once said, I don't know how you do it. You read spreadsheets and souls with equal clarity. But behind the scenes, it wasn't always peaceful, because this kind of gifting is lonely. When you carry both leadership and sensitivity, people often don't know where to place you. You're too intuitive for the boardroom, too logical for the prayer group, too soft to command, inclusive, too strong to follow. You become the bridge in every environment. And sometimes bridges get walked on. Naomi remembered a moment when this duality nearly broke her. She had just launched a mentorship program at her church, balancing budgets, schedules, spiritual direction, and heart healing all at once. It was working. Lives were changing. But one night, a deacon pulled her aside and said, You're doing too much. You need to choose. Either lead like a man or nurture like a woman. She didn't answer. But that night, she wept. Not because of the insult, but because part of her had believed it. She had tried for years to fit into either /or roles. She'd been told she was too deep, too ambitious, too soft-spoken, too bold. But what if she wasn't too anything? What if she was exactly as God designed? That's when the double M came back to her mind. It wasn't just a sign, it was a strategy. 1 M for wisdom, 1 M for feeling, 1 for the heaven-born vision, 1 for the earth-rooted execution. Together, they created the kind of person who didn't just see problems, she solved them with compassion. She began living differently. At work, she no longer silenced her gut for the sake of being professional. If something felt off, she spoke up, and she was usually right. At home, she no longer hid her brilliance for the sake of peace. If something needed fixing, she led with clarity and heart. Her daughter once said, Mum, when you talk, it's like you already know the answer before anyone even asks. Naomi smiled. It wasn't pride, it was alignment. But the double M also came with warfare, because people don't always celebrate balance. Some mistrust what they can't control. Naomi began to see it. The way co-workers whispered when she knew things without explanation. The way spiritual leaders looked unsettled when she asked hard questions. and cried during worship. But she wasn't here to make people comfortable. She was here to move things forward with depth and dignity. One night, during a particularly intense prayer time, Naomi wrote something in her journal, something she didn't fully understand at the time. I am not a contradiction. I am a convergence. Where wisdom marries intuition, heaven touches earth. That line stayed with her. It became her rhythm, her anchor, her truth. And then came the dream. She stood on a narrow bridge between two cliffs, one labeled spirit and the other structure. Beneath her, a swirling void. In the dream, people were afraid to cross. Some stood weeping on the spirit's side, paralyzed by emotion. Others shouted from the structure side, trapped in cold systems. Neither could cross. But Naomi, she walked the bridge. She knelt halfway, stretched out both hands. And one by one, others followed her. Not because she yelled, but because her presence said, "It's safe to be both." When she woke, her palms tingled. She looked down. The M's were glowing in the morning light. She heard a whisper, not out loud, but in her spirit. You are the hinge between realms. You are the gate between wisdom and feeling. You are the key that doesn't choose one side, you open both. From that day forward, Naomi embraced her design. She stopped apologizing for being both structured and sensitive. She stopped letting the world force her into boxes that didn't fit her divine architecture. She started owning her dual anointing. At work, she became the consultant others called when logic failed. At church, she became the mentor who listened first, then offered insight that pierced like prophecy. And at home, she raised her daughter to understand. Don't shrink to fit the room. Let the room rise to fit you. Now, every time Naomi opens her hands in prayer, she sees the double M, and it reminds her she doesn't have to pick a side. She is the balance. She is the convergence. If you carry two M's, one on each hand, you weren't made for extremes. You were made for integration. You weren't meant to live in contradiction. You were meant to bring harmony to divided places. God didn't split your gifts. He multiplied them. And now, He's calling them into agreement. You are not confused. You are calibrated. And your duality is not a distraction, it is your design. So, lead, feel, build, pray. Trust both your strategy and your soul. Because you, chosen one, you are where wisdom marries intuition. And when you walk in your full design, heaven follows. Part 4. The Crescent plus one. On one hand, the dreamer who builds. Some people are dreamers. Others are builders. But the rarest carry both. Ileana was one of them. She didn't always see it. She used to think she was indecisive. That tug of war between her desire to retreat into quiet, sacred spaces and the fire that burned in her belly to do something with what she saw. But then she looked down at her left hand one morning, and there they were, side by side, etched by eternity, the crescent moon and the M. She hadn't seen them before, not with clarity, but something about that morning shifted everything. She had just finished praying, asking God once again why she felt so spiritually awake and yet so restless, why she could dream entire solutions in her sleep, feel others' burdens in her chest, and yet struggle to move forward. She'd whispered, "Lord, why do I see so much and still feel stuck?" Then she'd looked down. The crescent under her thumb glowed softly in the light. And the M, it cut boldly across her palm like a declaration. And something whispered, "You're not stuck. You're standing in the doorway between the invisible and the real. And now, it's time to build what you've seen. Eliana's grandmother used to tell her, "You're made of moonlight and iron." At the time, she didn't understand. But now, she did. Moonlight for the sensitivity she carried. Iron beneath it. Eliana had always felt things. Runes shifted when she entered. Strangers confessed secrets they didn't mean to share. She could feel when someone was hiding pain, even when they smiled. But she also knew what to do with those feelings. She didn't just sense injustice, she organized healing spaces. She didn't just dream of change. She formed teams, wrote grants, built structures. She wasn't just a prophet. She was a project manager for the kingdom. Still, the in-between space was hard, because the world wanted her to choose. Be soft or strong. Be spiritual or strategic. Be creative or competent. But her hand told the truth. She wasn't meant to choose. She was meant to carry both. Her childhood had offered early clues. She was the kid who talked to trees, but also ran the school newspaper. The teenager who journaled dreams and moon phases, but also led student government and debate. She could quote both scripture and spread speech. People didn't always know what to make of her. Some called her weird, others intimidating. But Eliana never cared about titles. She just wanted to bring heaven to earth, and needed both vision and tools to do it. She remembered one vision that haunted her for years. A staircase made of light, leading to a library in the clouds. Inside were books filled with blueprints, plans for ministries, missions, businesses, healing centers. And the voice in the dream said, "These are not fantasies. These are assignments. But only those who honor both realms, spirit and structure, can build them." When she woke, her palms tingled. That was the first time she noticed both signs on one hand, but the weight was real. She often felt torn, one part of her craving silence, incense, scripture and stars, the other demanding calendars, deadlines and action plans. Some days she wanted to disappear into the woods and pray. Other days she wanted to pitch to investors and revolutionize her industry. She cried once, saying to a friend, "It feels like I'm split between a mystic and a CEO." But the spirit whispered, "You're not split, you're fused. You're the kind of daughter I trust to carry blueprints from heaven and build them in the earth." Eliana began living differently after that. She stopped apologizing for her depth and stopped hiding her power. She let her spirituality flow into her strategy. She prayed before every meeting. She designed workspaces like sanctuaries. She wrote vision statements from a place of intercession. And people noticed. Clients started saying, "There's something peaceful about the way you lead." Employees told her, "I feel seen here." Even her skeptical colleagues admitted, "You've got insight that goes beyond data." She smiled quietly, because they didn't know. She was building from downloads, not trends. She was listening to Holy Spirit, not market analysts. And it was working. One moment stood out. She was mentoring a young woman named Tasha. Sharp, gifted, but spiritually shut down. Tasha had an idea, but couldn't seem to move it forward. "Why do I see so much," she asked, "but feel paralyzed when it's time to act?" Eliana took her hand gently and said, "Do you have a crescent?" Tasha looked surprised. "Yes, and an M." Eliana smiled. "You're not paralyzed. You're overwhelmed because the vision is big. But here's the secret. You don't have to choose between dreaming and doing. God gave you both signs. That means He's given you both strength and sight." Tasha's eyes welled with tears. Eliana walked home that night feeling the presence of her grandmother in the wind. She whispered, Thank you for seeing it in me before I did." She looked at her hand again. The moon and the M, the dream and the direction, the feeler and the finisher. Now she lives in rhythm. Moonlight mornings for journaling and prayer. Midday meetings to build and bless. Leaving silence to listen again. She no longer fights the duality. She honors it, because her hand carries proof. I was made to dream like a prophet and build like a pioneer. If you carry both the crescent and the M on the same hand, you were not made to choose between spiritual sensitivity and bold leadership. You were made to unite them. You are the architect of the invisible, the one who hears the whisper and builds the wall. You don't just feel, you follow through. You don't just sense, you structure. You are the bridge between prophecy and plan. And if you've ever felt torn between the clouds and the ground, look again. Maybe your hand holds the answer, because you're not just a dreamer. You're the dreamer who builds. Part 5. The crescent moon plus 2 M's, the sacred fusion. Zara was used to hiding, not from people but from the immensity of what she carried. Ever since she was a child, she had felt too much and too capable at the same time. She knew things without learning them. She felt burdens that weren't hers. She took charge before anyone asked. And for years she thought it was just anxiety, just over-responsibility, just over-sensitivity. But that night at the retreat, the night the wind spoke and the fire wouldn't go out, she saw her hands in the candlelight, and everything changed. The crescent moon curved soft beneath her thumbnail, just like always. But now, clear as daylight, an M rose across each palm. One moon. "UM?" She gasped, not because it was new, but because it was finally seen. It was as if God whispered, "You've been carrying heaven's weight for years, but tonight you remember who you are." She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back in her childhood room, alone, 9 years old, hiding under a blanket after another loud argument downstairs. Her hands were pressed together, whispering prayers she didn't know how to form. "God, can you hear me?" Back then, she didn't know how to name what she felt. The sadness, the discernment, the compulsion to fix everything before it broke. But even then, the moon was there. And even then, the lines on her hands formed silent letters. Heaven had written identity into her before she had language for it. Zara had always lived on the edge of two worlds. She could pray for hours and still run a business. She could host worship nights and close six-figure contracts the next day. She could hold someone's hand in hospice and coach leaders in a boardroom. She carried compassion and command, empathy and execution. But no one ever told her that was okay. The church said she was too intense. The world said she was too spiritual. So for years she fragmented herself. Half prophet, half professional. One foot in worship, one foot in war. Until that night, as the wind howled and the candle flickered, she looked at her hands, not with confusion but with reverence. This was no accident. She hadn't failed to pick a lane. She had been formed for fusion. She remembered something her mentor once said in passing: where God trusts you with both sensitivity and strategy, the warfare increases, because hell fears what you'll build when you stop doubting yourself. Zareth now understood that truth intimately, because the attacks she endured weren't random. They were tailored. Loneliness, betrayal, misunderstanding. Each one was meant to crush the bridge between her two worlds, to make her choose one and abandon the other. But she hadn't. She'd survived. And now she was ready to unify what had long been torn apart. In the silence of that cabin, Zerat prayed aloud, "Lord, if you gave me both, then help me carry both without breaking." She expected stillness. Instead, she felt a presence, thick, holy, weighty. It wrapped around her like a shawl of fire and oil. And the Spirit whispered, "You carry divine duality. Your moon is for the mystery. Your mems are for the mission. One hand receives, the other builds. You don't fit in this world, because you were made to fuse realms."
Zyra broke down weeping, not out of fear, but freedom. She had spent decades explaining herself to people with smaller assignments. But now, she didn't need their approval. Identity was etched in her flesh. She was not just marked. She was activated. In the days that followed, everything changed. She began living with holy intentionality. At work, she led with conviction, but now she paused to pray in between meetings. At home, she mothered with gentleness, but also taught her children how to hear God. At church, she ministered boldly, but stopped apologizing for her corporate giftings. She no longer separated her callings. She braided them. And wherever she went, the atmosphere shifted. Because she carried both moonlight and mantle. On Sunday, a woman approached her in tears after a conference. "You spoke my language," she whispered. "For the first time, I don't feel split." Zara smiled, took her hands gently, and looked down. The woman gasped. She said, and an M on each palm. Zara whispered, "You're not crazy. You're called. And this fusion you carry, I think it's sacred." Zareth now begins every day the same. She lights a candle, lays her palms on her lap, and whispers, hand to feel, one hand to build, let it all be holy. And heaven responds, because those who carry this rare combination, Eresin and 2M, are not just dreamers, not just leaders. They are ambassadors of divine fusion, the sacred bridge between revelation and reformation. You carry the crescent moon, and 2Ms, you're not too much. You are precisely designed. You were never meant to pick between spirit and structure. You were meant to walk between the realms and bring them together. You are the architect of atmospheres, the warrior with tears, builder with a burden, the whisperer who commands. You don't just carry light. You are the light, marked not for platform but for purpose. If you've ever felt torn, look again. Your marks don't conflict. They confer. You were chosen to carry both. And now it's time to rise.
Heaven marked you, now the world will see why. There comes a moment in every chosen one's life when the noise fades and the mirror of the soul turns crystal clear. Maybe it doesn't come with trumpets or visions. Maybe it's as quiet as candlelight, as gentle as staring at your own hands and whispering, "Was this here all along?" Because that's how heaven marks its own, not always with thunder, but with tenderness. A crescent moon beneath your nail, the M etched into your palm, or both held like scrolls across your skin. They were never about mysticism. They were about mission. If you carry the crescent, you were born to feel what others ignore. You are the soul listener, the intercessor, the early warning before the storm. If you carry the M, you were born to lead in silence, to shift rooms without shouting, to correct injustice with compassion. If you carry both in one hand or in two, you are not a contradiction. You are convergence. You are the bridge between heaven's whisper and earth's need. And the world needs you now more than ever. Life lessons to leave with. Sensitivity is not weakness. It's a sacred radar. You don't need a pulpit to carry purpose, just open hands and a willing heart. God didn't call you to pick a side, He designed you to unite them. The mark isn't what gives you power, it's what confirms what you already carry. You were never random. You were written into the scrolls of heaven. If this story awakened something in you, if you saw your own hands differently, if your soul whispered, "This is me, I am marked for more," share this story with someone who feels spiritually sensitive, unseen, or torn between gifts. Support the journey. If you believe more stories like this need to be heard, that the marked ones deserve messages written just for them, follow this channel. Stay with us, because this is only the beginning. We are building a space where the marked can rise, where sensitivity is seen as strength, and where your palm isn't just a hand, but a prophetic map of who God designed you to be. You are not lost. You are not late. You are not strange. You are marked, and the world hasn't even seen the full weight of your calling. Yet